So this video is all about the collective consciousness. So what exactly does that mean, and how can we individually benefit from understanding what the collective consciousness actually means? So if this is your first time to the 10-10 movement, a huge welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. The 10-10 movement is all about moving individually and collectively towards living a 10 out of 10 lifestyle, and at least if we could get to an 8 or 9, then how would the world be a whole better place, is what I'm always saying. The actual average right now is probably about 5 or 6 out of 10, and feel free to take the life test at 10-10.life, where you will find out your own personal score. So collective consciousness, what does that mean? Well, basically individually we have a consciousness. So some people would argue, well, there's this sort of technical stuff, you know, how does that all work in science? Well, the science meaning is, you know, it's sort of quite complex, and to be honest, we don't really need to know that. We need to understand what does it mean to us individually, and how can I benefit, or what's the benefit of me knowing and understanding it. So for me, what it means is most people will sort of recognize that we are made up of mind, body and spirit. Like they should be 3 equally sized circles. When I first started on my journey, I realized that I had a very big mind circle. I also had a very big body circle to go with it, but my sort of spirit circle was very underdeveloped, or I sometimes call it switched off, because we all have access to spirit. In fact, you know, some people ask that great question, are we a human being having a spiritual experience, or a spiritual being having a human experience? And I'm always with the latter, actually. Previously, if you'd have asked me that, I'd have probably gone with the former, but now I definitely believe that our spirit has come to have this sort of human experience. But once we've arrived, what tends to happen for a lot of people, definitely happened for me, is my spiritual switch. Well, I would say if I had a dial, I turned it right down, but actually I believe I had a switch and I switched it off completely. And it took me like till I was age 47 to sort of realise I've even got a switch. And when I switched it on, it was like a very unfamiliar place to me. But what happened is I started to build that more spiritual aspect of myself by just literally understanding what it meant. Now, by understanding my spiritual aspect, I understood more about my conscious aspect. In other words, I became aware of a part of myself which previously I've had switched off. So you could sort of switch the word conscious for the word aware. So when I was sort of unaware, although I believe that we all have a knowing, it's just we've got our switch switched off. But once we switched it on, there's a sort of a bit of a strange experience of that. But there's a knowing that it feels right, that this part of us maybe was just either turned right down to a very low ebb or switched off altogether. And once you switch it on, you connect with this part of you, which is like a magnificent part of you. And what happens is your consciousness expands. So what's that got to do with collective consciousness? Well, the individualization, part of the magic of being a human, is that obviously our spirit comes, it takes our body is its temple type thing, yeah? And we then, it's our job to look after our body and look after our mind part, which is also a great gift that we have, the free will of the mind. But the conscious part of us also is a part of our individualization. So I'm not even sure that's the right word, to be honest, but we become individualized. That's probably the correct word. So, you know, there's what, nearly 8 billion individual humans on the planet, and you'll hear loads of people speak about oneness. So what does oneness mean? Well, it means that each individual person has got a level of awareness of themselves, that's their mind, body and spirit, and the balance of that. And so mine was massively out of balance, and I've worked for some 20 years to understand and benefit from getting it back into a more balanced space. So the individual works as an individual, but collective consciousness is when we join together. So think of it like this, you know, like your family, for example, they are like a group. And if you notice, I use the example of when you were a child, did you ever go to somebody else's home? Maybe nowadays you tend to do a sleepover. In my day, when I was young, we never did sleepovers, but I used to go to my friend's house for, say, tea or something after school. Now, when I went into their house, I noticed that the energy in their house, or the feeling, at the time I would never use the word energy, but there was a different feel, should we call it, in their house to my house. So what is that all about? Have you ever been in somebody else's house where their house has got a different feeling to your house? Well, that feeling is part of consciousness. Consciousness is sort of what we're experiencing from it, and we dilute consciousness massively via our 5 physical senses. So what you might have noticed is like a slightly different smell. Everything looks different, yeah? They might eat different foods, so their taste of their life together is somewhat different. You know, you've got the touch, you know, maybe they were huggers and you weren't. And then we've got, what do we hear? They might say different things, speak slightly differently, yeah? So all of that dilution of everything that's going on gives us our individual consciousness. And then when you go to the family group, the family has a consciousness. So the family is like a collective consciousness of a group of people that perhaps live in one house. And that's why one house might feel different to the other, even if they were built by the same builder and exactly the same plan. It won't take long for the consciousness of one house to take on a different feel to the consciousness of the next house. Now then we have like if you go to a larger consciousness, you might go to like the area that you live in, you know, this, let's say the village or the town that you live in. That will have a feel to it. That's the collective consciousness of that town, that village. That's all of the people coming together, the way they do things, yeah? You go to another town, it's got a different feel to it, yeah? So as we expand bigger and bigger, maybe we'll go to our county, for example, or maybe we'll even go to our country. If you go from England to Scotland, there's a different feel to Scotland than there is to England, a different feel to Wales, different feel to Ireland. Now when you go to like France or you go to Europe, you might go, right, but we could put all the Europeans, they don't like being in one bucket, but Europe's got a consciousness which is different to, say, America, or different to Australia, or different to Africa. So as we expand outward, everything's got a consciousness. So the collective consciousness is the whole of the humanity of planet Earth all added together. So this has then got, you know, like an average. So you could sort of give it like a number if you gave it an average. Obviously, I'm a fan of the 0 to 10. So if you had to say, on a scale of 0 to 10, if we added up the collective consciousness of all the humans, in other words, how do we behave? How do we look? How do we feel? What's our energy? Loads of different aspects of us that build our consciousness. What is the collective consciousness of the humans that live on planet Earth when you added it all together? Think of it on a scale of 0 to 10. If the consciousness was fully expanded and we lived a magnificent life in harmony, love and joy, you'd probably give it a 10. Now, if we're down in the depths of the darker energies of the planet, where we were all at war and we're all fighting and we're all struggling and everything's a challenge, and the tribes, the different races, they're all, you know, at each other all the time, that would be a very low score. So just give it a number for yourself. What number would you give the collective consciousness of the humanity that lives on planet Earth? You'll come up with a number. I guarantee you're not going to say 10, because there definitely is some homework for us humans to do. And what that homework looks like, and this is my thing, the one thing that we can do to help the energy or the consciousness, the collective consciousness of the human race and planet Earth, because planet Earth is part, you know, it's a part of it. Some people would argue it's like a living being itself. It's not just a rock floating around space. It's a living being. It's a living being. And we're part of that living part of Earth. And that collective consciousness of the humans affects the life force of the planet. So the one thing that I would say that you could do is look at your own level of consciousness. Where do I hang out? Where is that? Because if I were to expand my conscious awareness of myself, then basically I would add a little tiny bit to the collective consciousness. Now, what's really interesting is this happened in my family, if you expand your consciousness. So, you know, my family, I've got, there's 4 of us, plus there was my mum and dad, and my dad's nan lived with me when, my mum's mum lived with me when I was young. So there was like 7 of us lived in one house. Now, when I look back at how our energy was, I would actually go, I'd probably be a bit harsh, but I'd say our energy was not exactly that expanded. You know, we lived the way we lived. I'm not making that wrong. It's just to be the observer of that. Now then, when I got to 47 years old, I realised there was like this part of me that was undiscovered. So my consciousness expanded, and of course that had an effect on that unit. Now, my nan had already passed to, you know, greater things, I often say, and there were the 6 of us left. And my dad really questioned what I was doing, because as I expanded my conscious awareness, it went out of sync, I often call it, with the other people's consciousness. And so that got challenged. But over time, I remember my dad, bless him, he said to me, do you know what, this stuff that you've been doing, you've been learning, this is like a couple of years, so it took time. He said, I can see right now how you are way more happier than you used to be. Now, happiness is an interesting word to use, because a more expanded consciousness would show up. People would use the word happy. It's interesting what language we use when we move to a more expanded consciousness. So he used that word of me, and then he asked me, just said, look, your sister's really struggling. Could you show her what you've learned, so that she, you know, you could help her, because she's, you know, it's not good for her right now. So my changing myself had a knock-on effect. It affected my dad, then it affected my sister, and let's say it affected all of them. Now, obviously, I've gone on to go and do, you know, loads of teaching, sharing all what I've learned, and I obviously met my amazing wife, Tony Vee, and we collectively, we both expanded our awareness, and then we've shared that message with loads and loads of people. So if there was one thing that you could do that would help planet Earth right now, that would be to look at your own level of consciousness. Study that a little bit. Look what it's going to take to maybe find the switch inside of you, if you haven't found that already. Or if you found it, then you've got like this dial. Could you turn the dial up? What would that look like? What would that take? So that would be my one thing. Dive into the subject of consciousness, of your individual consciousness, and as you do that, you will expand. You will do your bit for humanity and the planet by understanding that your consciousness is part of the collective consciousness. So I'm going to leave it there. That's it from me. If you've got something great from this video, two key things to do. One is share it with your friends if you feel that will be useful to them. Secondly, hit the subscribe button, because we make 2 videos a week. My beautiful wife makes one, I make the other one, and they go live every Tuesday and Friday. And obviously, if you'd like to be notified, hit the notification bell, and a little notice will come up on your phone or your computer to tell you that we are going live right now, or another video has just been uploaded. So we look forward to seeing you on the next video. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate that. Bye for now.